Welcome back to another edition of the Sal Greco Show, and I'm the host, Sal Greco. First and foremost, to everyone who has just subscribed to this channel on YouTube or is new to this channel or is new to the podcast, from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to thank you. It's an honor to have you here. Anyone who is actually on YouTube right now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. If you're on Rumble, hit that Rumble button, hit that follow button. And if you're listening on any major podcast streaming platforms, please hit the like button, share, or subscribe. I am just flabbergasted over what's been going on for the last couple of years, actually, in New York City. I myself, as you can see behind me, I worked in the New York City Police Department for 14 years until I was unceremoniously terminated for basically political reasons. And I do have a sentiment towards New York City. It's an attachment. It's, you can't work all those years and not have some kind of feeling towards your former employers, co-workers, what can I say? People that you served, the neighborhoods I was in, and to watch this, what's going on it's just, mind numbing. So this episode, of course, will be focused once again on New York City and the New York City Police Department. Jeffrey Maddrey, the former chief of department, in this hellacious press conference he held. And there's an article written about that also. So I'd like to play something that John Macari, my friend from the Finance Filter podcast, actually posted, and then read you an article and show you this article in regards to this press conference.
So that everyone understands how overtime works in the NYPD. There is a system of checks and balances in place so that overtime can't be stolen. But let me tell you right now, Chief Maddrey is not a part of that checks and balance system. Chief Maddrey manages the day-to-day operations of 33,500 police officers in their fight on crime. Okay? Now, when a police officer or a member of the NYPD puts in for overtime, they have to fill out what's called a slip. That slip has to be signed by a supervisor. That supervisor is never a chief. There are people within chiefs' offices who are tasked with making sure that slips are appropriate and have to be approved. And that's where you see the bottom where they sign it. And here is the back of it, where a commanding officer has to approve it. Jeff had a commanding officer of the chief of department's office. He is not the commanding officer. Okay? Jeff never approves, assigns, or gives overtime. Lots of people in the chief of department's office made overtime because they legitimately worked it. In fact, last year, there were 415 members of the NYPD that made over $100,000 in overtime.
I want you to be assured that we do put our best efforts in to reduce overtime. Our biggest challenge with reducing overtime is the unforeseen and unknown. A lot of times where we have our plans and overtime is mapped out, situations arise, protests, terrible shootings where we believe there's high retaliation, and this requires us to hold over additional resources, additional personnel. So this is really a big factor in why our overtime continues to fluctuate, where we don't meet, our projections, because we have these unforeseen circumstances, and it's all around public safety, around keeping the community safe, keeping traffic moving, and keeping young people safe.
Thank you, Chief.
Ex-NYPD Chief Jeffrey Madry shrugs off sex abuse scandal as an, quote, office fling, end quote, as department shakeups continue. This is by Graham Raymond and Thomas Tracy of the New York Daily News.
Ex-NYPD Chief Jeffrey Madry shrugs off sex abuse scandal as an office fling as department shakeups continue. Disgraced former NYPD Chief of Department Jeffrey Madry shrugged off the sex abuse accusations filed against him as an office fling, as aftershocks from bombshell allegations that he swapped overtime for sex continue to rattle the upper levels of the department, the Daily News has learned. That's all it was. It was an office fling, a stone-faced Madry told WNBC about his relationship with Lieutenant Quathasha Epps, who says the former highest-ranking NYPD officer sexually harassed her and forced her to perform unwanted sexual favors in return for overtime pay. There was really nothing to it. There was no romance. We weren't girlfriend and boyfriend. The Madry interview took place shortly after his attorney held a press conference at his Lower Manhattan office Friday, claiming that the relationship between Madry and Epps, who he described as a swinger, was consensual. Epps made up the allegations that she was forced to have sex with Madry so she could get away with a scheme to collect overtime pay for work she didn't do, including $204,000 just this year, Lambrou said. We can tell you now, those allegations are a lie, Lambrou said. They're not true. We deny every aspect of them. A Daily News report published in November named Epps as the highest-paid member of the NYPD with a salary of $406,515, $118,203 more than the $285,313 former Commissioner Caban made in fiscal year 2024. Madry's denials did nothing to halt the ongoing shakeups in the department, particularly in the Internal Affairs Bureau, which would have been responsible for investigating Madry for sex abuse and overtime fraud. On Saturday, Deputy Chief Chris Morello, Inspectors Joseph Profeta and Michael Ricciardi, and Deputy Inspector Dawit Fikru were all removed from IAB and transferred to other departments, according to paperwork seen by the Daily News. A day earlier, 10 other officers assigned to the Internal Affairs Bureau, including 2 lieutenants, 2 sergeants, and 5 detectives, were moved to other posts as a rare purge of the unit continued. After Epps' allegations were made, Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch removed Chief of Internal Affairs Miguel Iglesias from his post. Many of the officers transferred were members of IAB Group 1, which is responsible for investigating allegations against NYPD captains and above, a source with knowledge of the case said. Profeta and Ricciardi are listed as co-defendants in lawsuits against former senior mayoral advisor Tim Pearson, who is also being accused of sexual harassment and retaliating against former NYPD Sergeant Roxanne Ludeman when she rebuffed his advances, and then sidelined the careers of NYPD Chief Militatis Marmara and 2 other cops who backed the sergeant's claims. If the NYPD is ever to break free from its entrenched culture of retaliation and favoritism, it must remove the executives handpicked by individuals now exposed as bad actors, Attorney John Scola, who represents Ludeman and Marmara, told the news. We remain hopeful that these ongoing changes not only vindicate our clients, but also pave the way for meaningful reform within the NYPD. In other department moves, Tariq Shepard, the department's former top spokesman who got into a public shouting match with interim police commissioner Thomas Donlan, was demoted from deputy commissioner to assistant chief and put in charge of the department's interagency operations division. Epps filed a formal complaint with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission on December 21. She alleged Madry repeatedly demanded sex in exchange for her getting overtime hours, and that when the lieutenant began to reject Madry's advances, he retaliated by adding her name to a list of the department's top overtime earners, according to the complaint. Madry abruptly resigned a day before the complaint was filed. In his WNBC interview, he said he stepped down because it wasn't appropriate for me to be in a relationship with anyone. Lambert claims that Madry, despite being chief of department, had no oversight over overtime requests. Epps' attorney, Eric Sanders, wasn't swayed by Madry's claims that the sex with his client was consensual. There can be no consent in a workplace where one individual wields immense power over another's livelihood, Sanders said. As Lieutenant Epps' direct supervisor, Madry leveraged his position as the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD to prey upon her financial and emotional vulnerabilities. Sanders said Madry demanded sexual favors, money, which were referred to as envelopes, and gifts from Epps. These demands were not the actions of a man engaging in a consensual relationship, they were acts of coercion and quid pro quo sexual harassment, Sanders said, adding that it's laughable that Madry had no sway over overtime approvals. The NYPD has strict protocols for reviewing, flagging, and approving overtime submissions, both pre- and post-payment, he said. As the highest-ranking uniformed officer, Madry was well aware of these systems and, as evidence shows, used his position to manipulate them to his advantage. To suggest otherwise insults the public's intelligence and undermines the integrity of the NYPD's internal controls.
All right, so what you just saw, what you just heard, should be, ringing a bell. Why? You just heard conflicting statements from first Jeffrey Madry's, I don't know, is he his attorney? Is his personal injury attorney? Because that's what the guy really specializes in. But his attorney, and let's be honest, I'm gonna say this right up front. That press conference that Jeffrey Madry held, they look like a bunch of sleazebags. I'm sorry. If I'm a spectator, it just looks sleazy. So what they stated is actually in contradiction to what Jeffrey Madry stated to the New York City Council. Okay? So before everyone jumps off the ship and says we need to indict Lieutenant Epps and Lieutenant Epps is this bad person, again, I will reiterate what the article was stating, that Eric Sanders, her attorney, states. In the New York City Police Department, there's balances and checks on operational things, overtime, budget. So this overtime scandal, actually, when you put in for overtime, there are numerous people way above you in different ranks and also civilians that manage this and look at this. And before you reach an astronomical number, someone will ring the alarm bell and notify people. One of those people that would be notifying would be Jeffrey Madry. And now he's running away saying he has no knowledge of any of this and he doesn't sign off on any of the overtime. But yet he would be right there when they discuss the budget and overtime. Why? Because it's impossible for anyone to make an exuberant amount of overtime without someone high up being notified of this. So before we go, screaming and yelling at Lieutenant Epps and other people that are on the list, just remember, you only do what you're allowed to do. Don't start screaming at a lowly cop when you have a chief that is clearly on the in with that. And Jeffrey Madry clearly perjured himself. So, yes, there is criminality here, but there is criminality also because I pointed something out in a recent episode and just a few days ago that I posted on social media on X about the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the Southern District of New York being on the 14th floor of One Police Plaza. And, of course, they're sweeping through numerous offices, including the 13th floor. And now, New York Post has confirmed this. Investigators search NYPD offices where disgraced top cop Jeffrey Maddrey allegedly bedded employee in sex for OT scandal. This is by Tina Moore and Matthew Sedeka of the New York Post. Investigators searched a top floor of NYPD headquarters last week, seeking evidence in the laundry sex for overtime scandal exposed by the Post, sources said. The sleuths perform a crime scene analysis in the 13th floor office of recently ousted Chief of Department Jeffrey Maddrey at One Police Plaza, where he allegedly preyed on Lieutenant Quaitisha Epps and demanded sexual favors from her in exchange for green lighting her staggering overtime pay, a source said. The investigators likely were looking for evidence of sexual abuse, a potential felony, a source said. Epps alleged in an equal opportunity complaint that Maddrey, the force's top uniformed cop, had sex with her 8 to 10 times in his office. She's alleging it was coerced. That's non-consensual, an ex-NYPD official said of a possible crime charged in the case. Maddrey's lawyer denied the allegations on Friday, insisting the ex-NYPD honcho had a consensual relationship with Epps and that he was weighing a civil suit against her. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's office announced last week it is probing the devastating allegations against Maddrey, and a police source said the feds are also probing the sex for overtime scandal. Epps previously told the Post Maddrey first propositioned her in June 2023, telling his underling he wanted to have anal sex with her. He then allegedly bent her over the couch in his office and violently pulled down her pants before reaching in a locker to pull out a bottle of KY jelly, she said. He then had sex with her even after she said, "Stop," Epps alleged. A police officer close to Maddrey recently was seen going into the disgraced ex-chief's office and removing unknown items after the Post reached out to the NYPD for comment on Epps' allegation last week. A second police source said it wasn't clear what items the cop removed. A police spokesperson said, at the direction of New York Police Commissioner Jessica S. Tisch, the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau has been actively partnering with law enforcement authorities to investigate allegations against former Chief of Department Jeffrey Maddrey. The New York Post is actually confirming what the Sal Greco show stated first. In fact, the article also references someone, a detective, going into the offices and removing items. Where did we hear that before? Oh, yeah, that's Sal Greco posting about a fixer who went into those offices somehow. I don't know how they even had the access to get in there, because obviously 13th and 14th floor, that's supervisors only. So how does a detective get in? You need special access, but it happened. And this article confirms first what not only myself said, but then Curtis Sliwa said on WABC in regards to my own reporting. And just for the record, in this past week, 10 NYPD cops were supposed to be trotted out and indicted for this overtime scandal. Had I not stated this, more than likely, that's what would have happened. The New York City Police Department is looking to throw little sheep to the wolves. Meanwhile, it is the wolves that are causing the problem. So, just wanted to clear the air with that. But then there's more in regards to this scandal, because there's other people involved. And the New York Post reported on this. 2 more female cops close to disgraced NYPD Chief Jeffrey Maddrey, including his driver, raked in massive OT and other perks. This is by Tina Moore of the New York Post. More female officers in disgraced top cop Jeffrey Maddrey's orbit pulled down massive overtime and other perks, the Post has learned. The driver for the former chief of department made an eye-popping $163,414 in overtime last year and resigned days after the Post exposed her boss's alleged sleazy conduct at police headquarters, records show. Detective Ingrid Sanders, was the seventh highest overtime earner in the department, boosting her total salary last fiscal year to $352,462, records show. That put her pay not far behind Letitia Epps, NYPD lieutenant, the top earner who made $403,515, including $204,453 in OT. Epps filed an explosive Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint accusing Madry of giving Epps overtime shifts in exchange for sex. The Post revealed in a front-page exclusive Sunday. On the day of the Post inquiry, Madry quit. Sanders was immediately transferred from one police plaza to a Queens precinct and filed for retirement on December 23rd, the Post found in police documents. Sanders is a first-grade detective, the top grade, who served in the chief of department's office since December 2022. She followed Madry there from the Patrol Services Bureau. She didn't return multiple messages. Madry also sought favors for second detective Ada Reyes, the Post has learned. Epps, Madry's personal manager, told the Post that part of her OT was devoted to taking care of Reyes. Quote, the overtime that he would give me, he would tell me to buy her things like get her some towels and things from Walmart, a microwave and stuff like that, so she doesn't have to come out of her pocket, Epps said. I make the overtime and then I give things to her. End quote. Quote, he would have me go apartment hunting with her, Epps said. I would be at work and he would tell me to get up and go with her to look for an apartment, end quote. Eventually, Epps claimed Madry told her to rent an apartment that was in her adult children's names on the Lower East Side to Reyes and her family because they were having trouble finding housing. Two sources confirmed the apartment arrangement to the Post. Reyes made $42,500 as a new police officer in 2019, but her pay jumped to $154,405 in 2024, including $55,923 in overtime, city records show. When Reyes came to work at NYPD headquarters in 2023, Madry told Epps to put her somewhere other than the 13th floor office, Epps told the Post. Quote, Ingrid Sanders and I worked directly for him. He was very specific not to put Reyes in the office, Epps said. He didn't want her and Ingrid bumping heads. End quote. Reyes was assigned to a domestic violence unit in another part of the building, she said. Reyes didn't return multiple phone and text messages seeking comment. Nobody was at the apartment when the Post visited. A neighbor confirmed she and her husband lived there after looking at a photograph of her. Epps' alleged overtime agreement with Madry began because she was having financial problems and her home was being foreclosed on, she said. Madry, the highest-ranking uniformed cop on the force, demanded, quote, unwanted sexual favors in exchange for overtime opportunities, end quote, from Epps. Between June 2023 and December 16, 2024, the EEOC complaint alleges. Madry would send her text messages telling her to close her door and, quote, strip from me right now, end quote. She would take video and send it to him, she told the Post. Epps claimed she had sex with Madry between 8 and 10 times on the couch in his inner office. The first time Madry told her he dreamed of having anal sex with her and then violently pulled her pants down and did so despite her repeatedly telling him to stop, she told the Post. Quote, I think he's a predator, end quote, Epps said. At a Friday press conference, Madry's lawyer, Lambros Lambro, called Epps a, quote, self-professed swinger, end quote, who was under investigation for, quote, stealing time and putting in for overtime she never worked. Now Lieutenant Epps got caught with her hands in a cookie jar and is trying to deflect her own wrongdoing by making these allegations against Chief Madry, end quote, Lambro said. Quote, however, the truth is Lieutenant Epps had a consensual adult relationship, albeit for a short time, with Jeff, end quote, he said, adding that they have a ton of evidence, including, quote, X-rated and racy videos and photographs from Lieutenant Epps, end quote. Madry didn't speak during the press conference and ignored questions yelled at him from the media. Now we're seeing the height of hypocrisy. Now we're seeing the height of nepotism. Now we're seeing the height of cronyism. Why, you ask? there's another little tidbit here that's being left out, because apparently this detective, Ingrid Sanders, who happened to retire abruptly once this entire expose was released on Jeffrey Madry, she may have a daughter in the NYPD. And that is another story that I believe very soon will be made public. And what kind of nepotism's going on there. What you're hearing here is criminality. Okay? There's a lot more than what's being reported. And trust me, I will be bringing my audience here a minute-to-minute update over what's going on and what we learn ourselves, because this is an ever-moving scandal. It's just the goalposts keep getting moved. So we're talking about transfers recently, right? There were a bunch of transfers in the New York City Police Department involving internal affairs and other offices. So the New York Post also reported on that. So let's read and show you this article. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch ousted dozens of NYPD bosses in shocking purge 1 week after sex scandal that rocked department. Tina Moore of the New York Post comes in with this one. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch ousted dozens of NYPD bosses in a shocking Saturday purge, beginning with the department's Internal Affairs Bureau, a week after the Post revealed that top cop Jeffrey Madry was allegedly trading overtime for sex at police headquarters. Deputy Chief Chris Morello, the number 2 boss at the famed Watchdog Bureau, whose mission is to weed out bad cops, was removed from the Post, paperwork obtained by the Post shows. This comes a week after IAB's top boss, Chief of Internal Affairs Miguel Iglesias, was ejected the day of the December 21st expose in the Post. Inspector Joseph Profeta, who was head of IAB's Group 1, was booted Saturday to patrol Borough Brooklyn North, documents show. The group investigates allegations regarding NYPD brass with the rank of captain or above. Quote, Tisch means business, a high-ranking source said. She's cleaning up the mess and putting the department back on track, end quote. The moves were made because of a, quote, lack of oversight, end quote, by IAB, the source said. Inspector Michael Riccardi of IAB Special Ops was also ousted and sent to Patrol Borough Manhattan North, the orders show. Another dozen IAB bosses, ranging from lieutenants to sergeants, were sent packing to far-flung precincts across the city, the documents show. 6 members of Madry's office, 5 detectives, and 1 police officer were also booted in the bloodletting, most of them sent to walk the beat in public housing, the documents show. The sweeping changes come after the Post revealed in a Sunday front-page story that Chief of Department Madry was allegedly granting overtime for sex to Lieutenant Quaitisha Epps, who raked in a total of more than $400,000 in 2024. Quote, if you want to show that you are generally trying to change the face of the department, get rid of all of Madry's cronies, this is the best way to do it. End quote, a police officer more than 20 years on the job said. Earlier this month, Tisch ordered 500 officers who had been, quote, improperly transferred, end quote, to go back to their regular assignments, and internal police memo obtained by the Post shows. The practice was known as, quote, telephone message transfers, end quote, and led to a lack of boots on the ground in some areas and therefore slower response times, the December 9th memo stated. Epps claimed in graphic detail in an exclusive interview with the Post that Madry, the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD, coerced her to have sex in his office between 8 and 10 times in exchange for the massive overtime. Her lawyer, Eric Sanders, filed a discrimination complaint with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, a precursor to a lawsuit. Madry abruptly retired the day of the Post report. He claimed through his lawyer on Friday that he had a, quote, consensual adult relationship, end quote, with Epps, but denied her accusation of, quote, coercion, end quote. The lawyer, Lambros Lambro, said Madry had no authority to sign off on overtime pay. In response, Epps' attorney told the Post, quote, this clown is a effing disgrace. We have a treasure trove of digital data that will hopefully bring this degenerate to justice, end quote. There's a lot of transfers going on. There's a lot of movement in the New York City Police Department. And I'd like one other note to be sidebarred here. Group 1 in the New York City Police Department investigates executives, captains or above. Obviously, a lot of this was quashed, a lot of investigations. One of them being a complaint that John McCarr and Eric Dim of the Finance Unfiltered podcast made in regards to being threatened by some moniker online that was a police officer, apparently, that was left the job abruptly, and they refused to give the name of that individual. And also, going back to when Jimmy Rodriguez, the mob associate and self-admitted criminal that was a manager of Conso Frito and the former owner of Jimmy's Bronx Cafe, threatened John McCarr and Eric Dim, also online. And we have a number of police executives that were associating with him when they shouldn't be. That was all in this complaint, and apparently it was quashed when it shouldn't have been. And now they are reaching out to him. Group 1 was the group in charge of that investigation, and now everyone that ever even contacted him and told them that they can't give them the name to that officer has been transferred. Also, Group 1 works together with Group 25, where Lieutenant Daniel Cutter and Sergeant Jeremy Ornstein, who are both involved in my termination, work hand in hand with these people. When are they going to be transferred? Since they love perjuring themselves and committing all kinds of criminal acts by illegally accessing sealed records and getting subpoenas and warrants where it's not warranted and getting it all illegal. That is a story for another day. But when is their transfer coming? I hope someone in the police department could explain that. But actually, someone in the police department can explain this, maybe. On this list of the highest earners in NYPD Chief of Department office is Officer Michael Devonish, who was associated with a criminal in 2021. Should have been terminated using the NYPD terminology used by then Police Commissioner Keyshawn Sewell to terminate me because I was Roger Stone's friend and a President Donald Trump supporter. Instead, Devonish is rewarded with 824 hours of overtime, making over $260K in the process. This officer is prospering, viewed as an upstanding officer, while I am blacklisted like a leper in society, left nearly bankrupted fighting for justice. Will NYPD Police Commissioner care to explain how this disciplinary system functions? Hashtag the Sal Greco Show. Here is the overtime list. As you could tell, Quetisha Epps, the lieutenant, she's the top person apparently in this office. Then there's Ingrid Sanders, who's not that far behind, and she was a detective who Rockefeller promoted her apparently, or Jeffrey Madry. Then we have two other individuals. Then there's Reyes, who we heard from an article previously. And then right there, number 8, is Michael Devonish. He made 824 hours in overtime. $83,000 plus. Just in overtime alone. And here is Michael Devonish. Since March 2024, he's in the Chief of Department's office, and in this fiscal year alone, he made $263,000. He was disciplined in 2021. He pled guilty to improperly used department property, violated uniform rules, armed without a shield, attended unlicensed location, off-duty employment without permission. Here's the big one, criminal association. He associated with someone who's reasonably believed to have engaged in or likely to have engaged in criminal activity. Remember that. Impeded an investigation, made misleading statements during an official department interview. That's what they said I did, actually, because I was never security for Roger Stone. But Sergeant Jeremy Ornstein, wherever you are, you kept saying that I was misleading you by saying I wasn't. But I was. I'm not his security. Michael violated Department of Motor Vehicle rules, made computer inquiries unrelated to official department business, improperly intervened. So his penalty, which he agreed to, was dismissal probation 12 months, pretrial suspension days 31, suspended without pay 29 days, and vacation days he lost 20 days. I want you to remember, I was never suspended nor modified. I was never modified, suspended during my entire investigation, which was bogus investigation. And here's somebody who undoubtedly should have been terminated. Yet now they're rewarded. And I sit here nearly bankrupted, trying to fight for my own name and justice for virtually every cop who was like me or worse getting stepped on, while this individual prospers. And I'm not picking on him. I'm saying you have a failed disciplinary system that needs to be torn down, shredded to pieces. This is a complete disgrace. Absolutely a disgrace. Now, look, I know what people are going to say. I could already hear it. You have an axe to grind, Sal, and this is... No. In something that would look transparent or something that is fair, everybody in a, what are we going to call this, organization, would be treated fairly. If Joe commits the same infraction John commits, then they need to be treated equal. Michael Devonish associated with a criminal. Michael Devonish apparently was, I don't know, he lied during an investigation. These are two things they said that Sal Greco did. They said that Sal Greco associated with a criminal. They're calling Roger Stone a criminal. And that I misled them and gave misleading statements, that I wasn't security, which I'm not security. So they made up a term, uncompensated security. So how does Michael Devonish, who was suspended, by the way, during this time period, survive and get rewarded on top of it? Because now he's in the chief of department's office and he's making an untold amount of overtime. And Sal Greco is a leper who is left fighting for his name and for justice, bankrupted, as the police department destroys one and awards another. And this is just a small microcosm of what I'm discussing here about the disciplinary system, how this is, this has a lot to do with the stress of a police officer. I was under so much stress during my investigation, not knowing what was going to happen next, wondering what's going to happen to me, my family, and it seemed that nobody really cared. People were more concerned of their own things going on in their own life, and you're a leper when you're in trouble in the police department, or they deem some kind of bogus investigation to come down on you. You are now a leper. There is little to no help for you. So something like this can really crush someone. And there's definitely a mental health crisis in the police department because of things like this. And John McCarry did post something, and I'm going to put it up on the screen, and I'm going to read it to you because it's very important, and I want people to see this. Here's a post by John D. McCarry, my buddy from the Finest Unfiltered podcast. Since most of you guys and gals in the NYPD follow hashtag the Finest Unfiltered, at Eric Dimkop, at the Sal Greco, at Fire Detective for information, insight, or comic relief, I feel obligated to post this. Today, another member of the NYPD committed suicide. This is happening far too often. There is no doubt the pressures faced by members of the NYPD are enormous. The schedule, hours worked, and stresses of the job are carcinogenic. They deteriorate humans, both mentally and physically. The reality is cops are also human. They face heartbreak, loss, and tragedy. Humans are not immune to depression, anxiety, physical or mental illness. None of us are immune from family issues, work issues, and financial pressure. If you're having suicidal thoughts, seek help. FUCK, what anyone thinks or says. FUCK your job or status. Save your own life. As someone who has experienced much tragedy, loss, and low points in life that I am not proud of. I speak with experience when I say whatever you are feeling right now, however embarrassed, lonely, depressed, anxious, or angry you are, this too shall pass. I am no doctor. I have a bullshit associate's degree, but with my 44 years of experience, I'm going to give some unsolicited advice. It's a line from a Tupac song that always served me well. Quote, if you can make through the night, there's a brighter day, end quote. There are many resources out there, 988, Health and Wellness, PAPA, etc. And while I will vouch for none of them, I can say they are worth trying before making a decision there is no coming back from. Godspeed. So unfortunately, the third member of service in the last, 10 days or 2 weeks has committed suicide. Nobody's really speaking about this, but it's definitely on the hearts and minds of those who either wear a shield or have had a shield, because there's an underlying problem here. And I know the stress of the job and how that is, and people need to be more cognizant of this going in. And remember, I'm one to say back the blue without a blindfold, of course, because you can't just everybody throw in one basket and, hey, back the blue, let's trust them, when you have monsters like the former chief of the department, Jeffrey Madry, and the now current chief of the department, John Schell, and deputy commissioner of operations, Kaz Daughtry, and now assistant chief Tariq Shepard running around. These people are a menace, not only to the police department, but to society. And that's the people that you can't trust. Why? They're calling the shots. They're the reason why there's so much stress. A lot of it has to do with them. So please take a minute and really, digest that one, because cops are humans too, especially those that work in the street. And my heart goes out to the families of the now deceased members of service. And hopefully we could get to the bottom of this epidemic that seems to be spreading more and more and more throughout not only this country, but throughout the world when it comes to people that work in uniform. Now, we get to something that's more on the radar here lately in New York City, where crime is through the roof. We had an incident in Coney Island of a woman that was burnt to death in a rail car. And I want to show this article. Let me read this and show you the article. Now Curtis Sliwa was going to jump in and try to protect people where the police department seems to be failing because they can't even, police themselves, apparently. Guardian angels start patrolling NYC subway trains again after shocking murder of woman who was burned alive. Quote, I've never seen it this bad, end quote. This is by Isabel Keene of the New York Post. The Guardian Angels will start patrolling New York City subway cars once again in response to the horrifying murder of a sleeping passenger who was burned to death on the F train last week, the group announced. Ever since the horrifying incident, quote, hundreds of citizens, end quote, have requested the Guardian Angels return to patrol the subway cars. The group, which was founded by Curtis Sliwa in 1979 in response to sky-high subway crime, said, quote, we're covering the actual trains from front to back, walking through the trains and making sure that everything is okay, Sliwa told the Post on Sunday. We're doing this constantly now. Starting today, that's going to be our complete focus because the subways are out of control, end quote. The group's latest strategy will focus on conducting wellness checks on homeless people and emotionally disturbed individuals. The Guardian Angels will also provide water to homeless people and report any issues they come across to the NYPD, the group said. The group last patrolled subway trains in 2020, following the target attacks on members of the Asian community during the 2020 COVID-19 spike. The group's 150 New York City members will start their patrols on trains at the Coney Island Stillwell Avenue station, where last week's senseless attack unfolded. A woman who has still not been identified was lit on fire while she slept on a train that had pulled into that station. which is at the end of the F line. Cops later arrested illegal Guatemalan migrant Sebastian Zabeta Khalil for starting the fire. Authorities said it appeared to be completely unprovoked. Quote, "There's so many trains that come in and out of here," Sliwa said. "It's the perfect place because it reminds people that nobody did anything a week ago. Nobody intervened. Nobody pointed to the cops and said, 'This is the guy.' Even the cops didn't do anything," end quote. Sliwa hopes the group's presence on the train will encourage people to not be bystanders. Quote, "It was an example of people just not getting involved," he said. And we're here to say, you see something, you say something, you got to do something, end quote. Part of the issue, according to Sliwa, was the lack of cops actively patrolling the trains to help people. Quote, "We're now back to where we were when I started the group in 1979 on the subways. It's gone full circle. I've never seen it this bad. Never," end quote, Sliwa said. So I actually applaud Curtis Sliwa, who was my pick to be the next mayor of New York City. If I was still a resident of New York City, I would vote for Curtis Sliwa. And I hope that everyone out there does also, because here's a guy who's an outsider. He's not a politician. He's not tied to any of these cronies the way Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo, whoever else wants to run for office, all the ghosts of the past that have all these issues. Because New York City seems to forget when it matters at the last minute and just goes back to saying, "Oh, that guy wasn't so bad. I know him." And they vote for him. So Curtis Sliwa, who at one time they called a vigilante for doing this kind of stuff, is trying to protect innocent people by just having presence on the trains in the subway. Now, if I don't even want to show the video, it's so disgusting. This poor woman that they still can't identify was burning to death. And I saw a police officer walk right by and do absolutely nothing. I mean, God damn it, take a damn fire extinguisher, do something. But that's the way the mentality of these police officers, some of them are now, because they're terrified of what can happen to them after the Daniel Penny case, after all the rioting, after all the scrutiny, because, you know, that officer would be punished for that, whereas the chief of department is never held accountable for all the criminality that he's done, right? And now I'm going to show you one final thing. Also, I reposted this off of John McCarty's X. Will fellow Supreme Team admirer and disgraced former NYPD Inspector Tim Pearson be popping in as a guest also? Here's a post. It's from John D. McCarty, my buddy from the Finest Unfiltered podcast. According to the controversial retired NYPD Inspector Corey Pegues at C. Pegues, tomorrow, December 30th at 4 p.m., at NYC Mayor Eric Adams will join in Instagram and Facebook Live. Why won't he come on? Hashtag the Finest Unfiltered. I wonder. And here it is. I highly urge people to watch this. This would be very fascinating. So later today, everyone here that watches this show and that watches the Finest Unfiltered podcast, please, I want you to watch Corey Pegues at 4 p.m. interview Eric Adams. Two guys that emulated whatever the Supreme Team from Queens was doing and saying, a criminal gang that led to so much criminal activity and was the prime reason for the whole crime. Remember the crackdown, the crack epidemic that went on, and there were numerous African Americans that were locked up, whether they had a small amount of marijuana or were involved in anything. Remember that crime bill from 1994? It stemmed from the Supreme Team's action when they assassinated a police officer in 1989. And Eric Adams and Corey Pegues speak very glowingly of these people, and so does Tim Pearson, you know, the forgotten man now. This ought to be fun because Eric Adams hasn't even spoken out about anything. Neither has the police department. And by the way, if Jessica Tisch is really the red herring, Police Commissioner Tisch, please explain how this NYPD disciplinary system works. And also, please, Why is Jeffrey Madry not suspended? Why is not John Schell suspended? Why is Kaz Daughtry not suspended? Why is Tariq Shepard not suspended? It doesn't matter that they put their papers in to resign. They should be suspended. Why? They still have 30 days, especially Madry or Schell, who's trying to run out the door. They should all be suspended. They're all involved in this. Unbelievable. Police Commissioner Tisch. Why is Jeffrey Madry not suspended? Why is John Schell not suspended? Why is Tariq Shepard not suspended? Why is Kaz Daughtry not suspended? Maybe because it's Eric Adams really calling the shots. And with that being said, this has been another edition of the Sal Greco Show. Tune in. Probably later on this week, I'm going to have a special guest to discuss all this stuff. So with that being said, I'm going to say good morning, good afternoon, and good night.